So my name's Stephen Ball, and I'm going to be taking you through this session today. And if you have any questions, as I said, please do go ahead and put them into the chat. The one thing I will draw your eye to just before we get started is there are a couple of handouts on the system. So if you have a look in your GoToWebinar chat panel, you should be able to see that there's two info docs there. One is Getting Started info doc for mobile development, and the other one is the info doc for RAD server. Now they're two very, very useful documents. They're just packed full of links to existing resources that we have out there that are really, really handy just to have close by once you get started moving into the mobile world. And please make sure you download those, save them somewhere safe, and are ready to use them as we get going. So during the session today, we're going to be looking first and foremost at why mobile and get some context around why developers are often looking at adding mobile to their existing applications. So there's quite a lot of you on board today, so I think quite a lot of you are going to find stuff to resonate there. We'll talk a little bit about getting ready for mobile, things to kind of consider, questions that you're probably going to get internally around development choices and what you're looking to do, just to help you understand some of those bits there. And then we'll get straight into coding, which is where we're going to spend most of our time, and talking about the basics of mobile development, and also looking at some top tips to help you. I might even pull up a project that I've got published up in the App Store just to show you a couple of things that I've done that have helped me, that I've learned as I've been kind of going through and building applications, getting them out there. And we'll also spend a little bit of time just to highlight a couple of things around mobile and data. It's a very key topic area for mobile, especially as a lot of stuff is outside of the core corporate domain. It's a very, very key topic to at least have an awareness around. Great options also including the box with RAD Studio Enterprise and Architect Edition with Interbase to Go, which has deployment-free, royalty-free license for Android and iOS. So that's a very, very useful thing to be aware of, and helps address a lot of the common challenges and constraints that often get put into projects where people are worried and seeing things that are risk factors that they need to control, and we can help you kind of through those. And we'll talk a little bit at the end just about some of the app testing and deployment. I probably won't have much time to spend through there, but I'll at least kind of give you some pointers to bits. And I say the info docs that we've got attached to the webinar here today include some useful links to get you up and running, get you provisioned, and we'll cover a couple of those bits quickly on screen, but primarily I'd point you to the short videos that are in the info docs as a way to kind of help you get going in those areas. So first thing, why mobile? Quite often we've got maturing apps, desktop. We've been desktop first, and we're looking at how we can bring the pieces of the puzzle together to help the customer get a much more rounded experience. Nowadays people are expecting, and most people have smart mobiles that are internet connected. They're expecting to be able to do things online and work wherever they are. And it's not always about being able to do everything everywhere. It's about being able to find the right things to do in different places. So I'll give you a really short example of maybe a builder going out to a building site, having to take some pictures of goods that have arrived or work that's underway, and having to save those images directly back to the job that's at hand. Now, that's a really good example of bringing the right tools to the right part of the job. Rather than having to have a camera and then having to get the photos uploaded onto a laptop and then trying to get those submitted in, or taking it back to the office and then kind of linking it in when you've got a big time delay, it's instantaneous, it's done, it's visible for everybody to see, and makes things move a lot quicker. It just helps with the whole communication. It's about bringing those different bits together. So that's a really, really key thing to focus on around mobile. It's about finding the right things to add to your desktop applications and not thinking you need to take everything to mobile. Just find the little things and look at new workways that you can bring stuff in with. And these bits are all great because they help with kind of customer stickiness, shall we say. So one of the ideal things of having a more holistic application is it means that your customers are then more embedded into what you're offering, which means, as if you're building applications to sell, it means that your customers are going to be longer term customers because of the extra bits that you're able to offer to them. It makes it a lot harder for them to kind of break the way that they work and what they do because they're looking at different options in the market. So customer stickiness is a really key thing. And quite often the work that you'll do to prepare to get ready to go to mobile opens up opportunities to provide APIs to your customers that they can then use as well, to be able to integrate into other systems that they might have internally or wherever, to be able to kind of get visibility of specific bits of data. And that, again, is a really good thing to encourage. That really helps embed your system really deeply into what your customer's doing and helps give a much closer relationship that's harder for them to break away from. And it's also about lowering risks. Working with your customers is something that I'd really encourage you to do when you're looking to go to mobile. Feed off them in terms of what types of applications they need, or talk to them about different bottlenecks that they're finding. They're going to find and have a very different view of their business that you may have, being one step away from it. If you're doing this on an internal project, everything inside an enterprise, talk to the stakeholders in the areas that you're providing solutions into already. Find out what areas could be improved with better access or with additional functionality that is appropriate from a mobile device. And again, it's not about taking everything, but by working with your existing user base, you're lowering your cost to market, you're lowering your risk in terms of adoption when something gets to market, and also just overall reducing the risk of the cost that you're putting into development by making sure that you've got a user base ready to go with it. And also, it gives a great relationship building exercise with your customers, helps them feel really loved and wanting to work with you even further. And they'll feed in ideas that you've never even thought about, which are going to help you win other business elsewhere. So, really, really good way to kind of help move these projects forward, just like any other kind of functionality. And I kind of touched on this one already. Usability. Some jobs are much better done by mobile, and we've got multiple different options within Rad Studio. One of them is actually around app tethering, so where you can actually launch and bring a mobile application to connect into a local desktop application without having a server anywhere. And we've got examples of this where it's being used in medical field. There's doctors taking their laptops out with them to do kind of remote appointment visits and being able to use their camera to take pictures of skin conditions or things that they've seen, wounds or whatever it is, to attach directly into the medical record there and then on their local device, where they've got offline data storage and everything else that's been working. So these are great ways to be able to work even without having to have full internet and full server capabilities, being able to kind of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi across to a local device using app tethering. But also when it talks about usability, and we'll touch into this a little bit later on, usability is about understanding that there are differences between different platforms. And just a really simple example is tabs. The tabs are either at the bottom or the top, depending if it's iOS or Android. And that's the default that people expect and they'll work towards and they'll be used to seeing. So if you start putting things in different places, it can be a little bit daunting for them. Now, the great thing is, with FireMonkey, we've got a UI platform that is context aware of the platform that it's running on, and the framework itself is able to adjust automatically for you without having to do any coding. But also you've got full control. So it gives you a great chance to be able to kind of build in the usability. And the other thing is we often look at having lots of different devices, different types of devices now. They come with different screen resolutions, much higher definition. These things you need to be aware when you're putting applications together, you need to get good quality images, get them at the right sizes, and there's the ability to load them in, just like the high definition work that's been done on the VCL. FireMonkey has the ability to load in different sizes of images to then make sure the right ones are being used to render and get the speed and performance and everything else. Now, additionally, you want to be getting to mobile because, quite honestly, you want to be ahead of the race in that your competitors are going to be running in. They are going to be out there looking to try and gain business. They're going to be looking for weaknesses in your offering. If they can find even basic use cases around mobile that are adding value, if you're not anywhere near that field, then you're going to be falling behind and running the risk of losing business. So it's really important to keep an eye on your competitors, as it is always, but finding those key things, talking to your partners, your customers about what they need, honing in on those really helps you kind of get to mobile. And also say, there's a critical mass now. There's bring your own device policies have been around for years. They're mature. People are used to working with them. There's not the kind of the barriers that people are aware of from before. So a lot of this stuff's been worked out in the last 10 years. So there's no problem being able to get to market and bring the stuff through. The key thing is obviously iOS and Android. They're basically the two players in the mobile space now. If you can target both of those, which you can with Rad Studio, you're there able to provide a solution that works with the procedures and the processes that companies are going to want to mature their capabilities around. And you can hit both those platforms natively, fully secure, straight off out the bat with a single code base, which is great. So in terms of things to think about before you get going, there are a few areas, and let's kind of have a quick look at some of these. In terms of getting going with mobile, infrastructure is something that is going to be very different that you need to start thinking about and understanding a little bit around. The difference between having everything local on the network versus remote is something that's kind of key to understand. When we look at traditional desktop applications, they're always running on the network. They're on laptops, they're hardwired into the networks, or they're running on a local Wi-Fi and they're kind of static whilst they're being used. So connectivity wise, it's connect to the server, hold your connection, work with the live data. When you're working remote, the differences are around not having direct access to that data. You don't really want to open up all the ports on your firewall directly to your database. So you need to look at how you can serve that data out. Things like DataSnap or RAD Server are great ways of being able to provide remote functionality to your data. And you can either host those locally or have systems connected remotely. But RAD Server is a very, very strong way to be able to have a very quickly put together backend that's got all the user security and everything else built into it that allows you to then serve that data out into remote devices. And again, if you go through the route of building kind of a RAD server backend, then that's a great API to have to be able to offer to other people. There's also kind of this, I mentioned app tethering with the doctor's instance earlier. That's a great option to be able to expand locally. So you don't always have to think about server architecture. The one additional one, which I haven't put on here, is actually is AWS, the App SDK that we have. There's a great webinar that we ran looking at using the AWS SDK and the services there to be able to implement exactly that example I spoke about earlier, a builder taking a picture at site and getting it back into the Office system. And that was all done completely serverless using the different cloud functionality that's available to be able to push stuff up. And that has the ability then being able to scale in a massive way up and down and just pay for what you need to use. So there's quite a few different options around getting stuff out to mobile. But thinking about your architecture and your infrastructure differences and how you're going to serve data is one thing that's part of that journey. The other thing to think about in terms of getting ready for mobile is around security. Now, I've mentioned a little bit about local differences already. When it's on the network, it's quite easy to control it through your server and have it, there's no data needing to be held on the mobile device, on the desktops. Quite often with mobile, you're going to want to have some functionality that can work even when you haven't got an internet connection. It's quite easy to kind of work out which apps are great and which ones are not so great when you go to start trying to use them, and you're got intermittent connection. There's no point having a sales app where you can download a whole load of customer information ready to go into a meeting and be able to take them through the stuff if you haven't actually got the data on the device and you've got no connection in the middle of a concrete building. Sometimes you need to be able to cache data in. Now that does bring in certain security and compliance issues in terms of who can see the data, who can access the data, what happens if the mobile device gets stolen, how can you prove that the data isn't vulnerable to people, all these types of things. So basically it comes down to encryption at rest and securing the data, and that's something that we can do with Interface to Go, and I'll touch a little bit more on that later on. But the one thing I will say is that when it comes to security, it's not only about what data you're using, but it's also about the type of tools that you're using to build your mobile applications. RAD Studio provides compiled native applications, and every platform we target, be Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, Android, they're fully compiled. So that means you've got the best security available. If we've got JavaScript or HTML applications that are bundled with a native viewer to allow you to run an application on a mobile device, you've still got those files that are being interpreted and run to then provide interfaces through. Now, they're a vulnerability layer. The whole Java layer is a vulnerability layer that can be compromised. So having fully compiled native applications adds an extremely large tick to what you're doing, and is a great selling point for you when you're putting your applications together to take out to customers. Now, time to market is also going to be something that's critical. Back to the thoughts around what you're going to do. Pick out what it is that you need to do first. Pick out where you need to put some back-end architecture in place and what front-end functionality you need. If you work out the front-end functionality, you can then often work your way backwards through the middle tier to your existing applications, expose the business logic that you currently have, and get that ready. That will give you a much better view in terms of your time to market. What I would say is, almost repeating myself again, is make sure you just focus in on the bits that you need and pick something that you can do quickly first and provide some immediate value. It doesn't need to be a massive application. It doesn't need to be everything you've done in the last 10, 20 years of development to get to mobile. Find the quick wins. And talking to your customers, you'll be able to find those and identify those, get them going. Once they're being used, get the feedback in from them, and then get the customers to encourage you and help work with you to develop any additional functionality and get that through and prioritize that workload. So keep your time to market quick. The other thing is, I mentioned usability, user experience. So there's differences between Android, iOS, and Android. Differences between different device sizes and orientations and all those kind of things. Now, that's something that is important to be aware of. I have on my desk what I call the drawer of doom, with multiple different devices in there that I can play around with, different versions of operating systems. It's part of the user testing that you do. But it's great to be able to kind of just test back on a couple of old devices once in a while and to see how things are working, especially before you publish them up to the app stores. Developing, I'd certainly say, if you've got an M1 device or an Apple device for doing iOS development, then the simulator on there and the new simulator compiler in the IDE is fantastic for doing all the iOS side of things. It's great for doing all the screenshots that you need to put into the App Store later on as well. But it's great in terms of getting early user feedback from different screen devices and being able to test it and just see it playing through. So as you're iterating through, run it onto different devices from time to time just to see how the screens are reacting and responsive to the designs that you put in. I say there's a lot of stuff built in with the way that the styles work, with the native and non-native control mixing that we can do, and I'll touch on that as we get through. but customers expect native experience, and we have that to hand. So use it and get going. In terms of scalability, I've spoken a little bit about AWS being a great way to do some backend, but REST is primarily the way that you're going to be looking to go. And RAD server has huge scalability. There's RAD server Lite that allows you to get a simple version going for a handful of concurrent users. And that's quite often enough for a lot of instances. But it allows you to scale complete to a full RAD server instance as you move on from there as well. So make sure you've got the growth in the path. The tools are in the box there to do that. So really recommend RAD server to make sure that happens. Now, the other thing is obviously looking at your total cost of ownership, the technical debt that you're building. As you're adding stuff in, you look where you can to share and reuse code. If you've got code that you've tested and you've worked through, great, reuse it, add it into the mobile applications. There's a great chance to be able to cross-share code here. And also from having a single code base, having less to manage and own and test and to update, that's one of the great things about RAD Studio is it allows you to kind of do all of those things directly from the same code. So in terms of choosing the code, I mentioned a couple of these bits, and I don't want to spend too long on here, but our tools allow you to kind of bring the best of the native vendor-based tools along with the best of the web-based approaches, where we can bring kind of the single UI, the secure development, one team, faster times to market, and avoid the complexities of having non-native looking UIs, having script that's being injected and can potentially be a security vulnerability, and also removing the risks of having multiple code bases. Bringing all those together, RAD Studio really does provide a great way to get out to market. And we're able to do this underneath the hood, and this is where it's really important to start learning about some of the libraries and the runtimes and the updates that have been done with those. Rather than having to kind of go through each different platform API to generate resources and then get the the different UI layers on top of them and the different languages and then the different ways of getting those packaged together, with RAD Studio, we're taking care of a lot of that underneath the hood. There's the different platform APIs on each platform. The FireMonkey runtimes and the libraries are then using things like interfaces to be able to map to those different platform APIs and provide you a consistent way of being able to work with each of those platform APIs by providing back a component or an object that implements the interfaces that are defined. And that gives great access through. Now, that covers most of what you need to do, but if there's ever anything that's a native library that you need to access into, you can still access it, which is absolutely fine. The FireMonkey layouts are brilliant at being able to provide both a native user experience, but also interject live or styled controls that gives you great flexibility in terms of how your UI looks, how it's managed, what functionality you offer. So that is brilliant, and being able to provide obviously one code base that hits across all the different platforms. So let's just close this part of it out with one example. So let's think about a camera. So a camera has a platform API that's very different on Windows to Android to iOS. But that camera has a number of points that are pretty much the same in terms of being able to start it, stop it, gather a picture from it, so on. So those data points are able to be used to provide interfaces that we can then use within our component layers. Those components that we use, or the interfaces that we call, provide us a single way to be able to code against that. But underneath the hood, as RAD Studio is running, as Delphi code is running on your platform, it will then give you back an iOS camera or an Android camera or whichever platform it is that you're targeting, but you still just work with it as a camera. So in the same way we've been protected from changes in the Windows API for 27 odd years, the same approaches are really standing up well to the mobile world and provide a very, very easy and familiar route in for developers of RAD Studio. So enough talk, let's get into the code. Okay, so here we are. This is RAD Studio 11.2. I've got, first of all, let me just point out where the best place to go for a few things are. Certainly the samples are great. So if you have a look here, let's just expand this path open a little bit further. Under, you'll see users, public documents, or wherever your documents are getting installed when you install. You'll find an Embarcadero folder, Studio, and then the version. This is version 22, so it's 22. And then in there, samples. Now, if you don't have the samples, just go to the tools, manage platforms, and enable the samples and make sure they're downloaded and installed along with the help. But in here, there's a whole host of different samples to go and play with. So if we just back up here, we can see there's a whole load of mobile snippets. There's a multi-device samples. There's some runtime library samples. There's some live bindings examples. Live bindings are something that you're going to work with quite a bit on mobile because that's the way that we link data to controls. There's no such thing as like a TDB edit. There's just a T edit, and we link to the data set using live bindings, which is great because everything is now data aware. But these are great. So if we go into the mobile snippets, let's have a look at the camera component one here. Here we've got a simple application. I'm going to show you a couple of bits here. Here's how it looks on Windows. We can see we've got like a different type of image for the button. The start button looks a little bit different. Let's have a look at Mac. Let's have a look at iOS. Let's have a look at Android. So you can see the subtle differences between the button and the images as we move through the platforms. Now, this button is a T button. It's the same T button that's on every form, but it's changing. Why? It's because we have this style lookup. So on the FireMonkey framework, we use styles. The style lookup here gives us, and we're connected for the iOS view at the moment, so we see the iOS style look of controls. It's telling us exactly what it is. This is a detail tool button. That's what a detail tool button looks like. On Android, it looks a little bit different, and that's the differences in the UI. So rather than having to have different images everywhere, the button is aware because the style's aware, and you can create and manage your own styles. There's a style designer. There's a number of styles that you can download through Get-It to implement and load into your projects to make them look really cool. And you can manage the different styles with different platforms very, very easily. So this kind of stuff just happens. It's almost like magic. It's brilliant. So let's have a quick look at the code behind here. So we've got a camera component. The camera component has got an on-sample buffer. Now let's just make this a little bit bigger. Here we've got a thread synchronized with synchronizing back to the current thread and passing in the camera bitmap, getting that passed through. So that's the method that's running. Here's the method just to sample the bitmap. If we have a look at the other code that's on here, we've got an action list. Now the action list has got in here 3 actions: to start, stop, and to show settings, which is to show the second form in here. So I'm not going to worry about the settings for the moment. You can come and explore that yourself, but literally just setting it active, setting it inactive, and showing the settings. The main thing that we want to have a look at is actually also on here. It's the on updates and the on execute. So the on execute here is going to say, right, first of all, are the permission services. So here, this is part of system.permissions. So this means this will work across all platforms. System. If you've not seen these before, I'm sure you probably will have now. We've got fmx.platform, which is an FMX one. We've got an Android elements here. So we've got an Android API elements. We can see here we've got system.actions, system.sysutils. So anything that's system. Is basically going to work across all platforms. So if the permissions are not sorted, then it comes in here and requests the permissions. That's what it's going to do. It's going to ask for the camera, and off we go. Now the on list update is then literally just, if the camera's active, it's just setting the action for the button if it's start or stop. So that's all that one's doing. So the setting of the permissions, let's hide these out of the way here quickly. We can We can see once it's been granted or not granted. We're able to activate or inactivate the camera. And if we get an inactive, we're able to use the dialog services just to show a message to say, hey, this hasn't been activated. So pretty straightforward, very, very straightforward. The only one line that's very different here is this permissions line. Now that's because there's differences between the way that Android works compared to the way that iOS works. So the request for permissions is slightly different. But here, this will give us back the request for the camera. Now we also need to make sure that when we run a project, so let's go and have a look at the project options here, that we have the permissions for the camera set up already. Now under the application, there is the permissions. So let's go ahead and choose Android here. And we can see here all these different kind of permissions that are once being set. We've got one for internet, and down in here there's different location ones. Here's the camera. So there's different ones that we're going to request that we can collect to. Now, previously on Android, you had to just set them in here and then it would be available. Now it's a bit more like iOS, where you need to, before you use it for the first time, at least ask, and it will pop a message up. But let's say the samples are a great place to go in to find that kind of information and to kind of get going. So I don't want to spend a lot more time in the samples there. They're a great place to go. What I want to do is just show you a couple of the basics around UI design and how to kind of put your forms together and kind of get stuff going. Okay, so there's a quick question here from Tamaz asking if you can do face detection in camera component. I definitely say that you could capture the sample of the camera. There's a really, really interesting project that's being used with the Python for Delphi at the moment, and being able to run that on Android. Now you could embed the image recognition, face recognition stuff from an AI library somewhere and integrate that in potentially. And that would be a really nice bridge with the kind of of having Python with inside a Delphi application doing some AI from the images that you're capturing through the camera. So that's potentially a way to do that. Not how to play with it, but certainly keep an eye out for the stuff that Jim McKeith's running on Android and Python, and that might be an interesting place to explore for you. Okay, so let's just go ahead and build. I'm going to build a multi-device application here, and I'm just going to give me a blank application because I want to just show a few things as we get going. So first of all, I'm going to throw down a tab control. Tab controls are really, really handy on mobile to help just build some UI elements up. Now, the one thing I'd say is that the temptation is to have lots of tabs and lots of controls embedded into the form. You can do that, but that does have a memory and a performance overhead that I wouldn't really say is the optimum way to do it. What I'd probably suggest doing most of the time is generating a number of frames and then loading those frames on demand into the tab. It's only a couple of lines of code as you go to the tab to check to see if that tab contains a control of a specific class, i.e. your frame, and if not, create one and parent it in. It's really, really quick and easy to do. That is something I'd highly recommend, unless it's kind of just a couple of tabs, a few different things, quite easy. Frames are a great way to be able to load and dynamically manage lots of different bits of data into an application. Okay, so let's just show you a couple of the bits around FireMonkey here. So I'm just going to grab a couple of rectangles quickly. There's one. Let's put another one in here, maybe another one. And I'm going to align one of these to the top. Let's go ahead and change the brush color here to red. And let's change this one to blue. And let's go ahead and align this to top. And you can see this is just kind of pushing up to the top of the one that's below it. Now, the alignments here, there's a lot of different alignments with FireMonkey. You can set things to most top. So if I choose that, the blue ones go to the top. You can drag and rearrange the ones that are just both aligned to top here. If I try to put the other one above it, we'll bring the blue one back down. It just snaps back up because its alignment is most top. So toolbars, for example, we put a toolbar in and align that to most top, and then drag it above here. We've now got our toolbar up there. Let's go ahead and put a label in. And this is a useful thing just to be aware of here. So a label, I'm going to put a style lookup onto it of a tool label. And if I go ahead and I'm going to set this to the client, I'm not going to leave it on client, and you'll see why in a moment. But let's just set it to client for the moment. And I'm going to set the alignment there to the center. So that's nicely in the middle. So if we have a quick look at the different platforms here, we can see how the tabs will look. We can see iOS, the tabs at the bottom, Android, the tabs at the top. So we can see that that toolbar is inside our tab quite quickly on Android. Over the multi-view here, let's just see if I can get a couple of the screens showing at the same time here. There we are. So we can see here, and this is quite handy to pop this out and put it on a separate monitor and zoom in a bit. You can see on different devices, how it's going to look with the application as you're designing it, which is pretty cool. Now you can also do this live on a device using FireUI, and again the source for that project is shipped with the product. You can just load it onto your device and off you go. Now I want to show you a couple of the things that are quite useful. We've seen actions already, so let's go ahead and pull up the action list here. And under the actions here, I can take the last one that I used here was take photo from camera action. There's a whole set of standard actions for navigation, which then manage kind of the visibility, invisibility, or enabled, disabled state, depending on if the data set is in edit mode or not. There's a whole set of media ones here for taking a photo from the library, from the camera, showing the share sheet, which allows you to share it, media player controls, phone actions, changing the tab, so going to the next tab, previous tab, or the change tab action here. So let's go choose that one. Let's put down here a button. I'm going to put that up here. Let's align this to the right. And in fact, I've aligned that inside the label. So let's put that into the tool button. And now onto the toolbar. And now we can see actually our label is no longer centered. The toolbar houses both the button and the label. Now, one trick is obviously to put the button inside the label, which then is just parented inside of it. It acts like a container, which is kind of a bit strange. But actually, really what I want to do is just make sure this stays in the middle. So instead of using client, I'm going to use content. And that aligns it to the actual parent that it's owned by. So here with a button, let's just go ahead and put this to the tab action. Now the change tab action here, we can change the text here. So maybe put next. Now the other thing we want to do is set the tab that it's going to change to. But also what I can do is on the button here, I can come and just set the style. So just like we've seen with some of the others, here I want to have a right arrow toolbar button. And we can see here how it's looking different on the different platforms as we're going as well. Or we can switch through and modify the designs on the different platforms. So let's just go ahead and test that here quickly on Windows. Okay, that's moved me forward. So that's quite cool. Now I mentioned obviously data. We kind of manage data and work with data in slightly different ways. So I'm just going to put down a list view here. Now a list view is a nice scrollable list. This is a control that is definitely worth getting familiar with. Let's just align that into the client here. I'm going to put down a prototype bind source as well. Let's just get rid of a couple of these. I don't need those. Now, prototype bind sources are great for binding objects or just doing some quick sampling. So I'm just going to grab a few different fields here. You can rename these to match the fields of or the properties of an object, and then at runtime attach the object into the prototype bind source. There's a onCreate adapter event here, which you can then link your list of objects or a specific object to the bind source, so you can then link to it. What I'm going to do here is just bind visually. Now, there's great links in the info doc to go and use those. It'll teach you about using prototype bind sources and live binding, so I'm not going to cover that in this session here, but definitely worth having a look at that. But let's just keep that in sync. List text I'm going to make into the name. The list view here, let's go ahead and change the item appearance. And we're going to change this to have an item appearance with an image. So an image list item. And I can now choose that to have a bitmap that links to this one on here. So that's all good. On the second page here, let's just go ahead and put an image control. And let's link that bitmap up to the bigger image. And maybe the title and the name we can link to a new control here. So let's have a t-edit control. Let's add a control label in. So that's great. That's gone onto the form. The one thing that has done is put it straight onto the parent. I want to put it into the tab. So let's collapse tab 1, and then let's just drag that onto tab 2 here. Just to set the parenting, and you can see how it's like looking on the different UIs as you're building, and then you can start working out how you want to align it, maybe using the alignment here. Let's align this to the top. Oh, now we've lost our control, so we need our title for it, so maybe we need to use some of the padding and the margins. So maybe I think it's the margins we need to use. So 5 from the left, let's go 5 from the right and 20 from the top, maybe 25. Okay, we can begin to see that's looking a little bit better. The title here isn't very big, so let's just expand that up. And we can see that's now fitting correctly across the different screens. So that's good. Brilliant. So the image, again, we can maybe just set this to align into the center. And we can just test that here locally on Windows. Let's go and choose Paul Davis. Okay, that's Paul. Choose Mary. Okay, we've got the different picture. She's a sales manager. So we can start building our UI up. We can start adding additional functionality. For example, on here we might do an on item click. We might want to change the tab control set active tab with transition to be tab item 2, and use a T tab transition of slide. So click on Michelle. Okay, there we are. Click on Mary. Click on Susan. And we see she's the vice president. So great. That's all working quite quickly. Now, if I want to run and test this out onto my mobile device, and under the project's target platforms here, we can see our mobiles. I've got a mobile device plugged in. I've got ADB set up, and I've got it provisioned already. So I can just go ahead and choose that here. I can literally just hit run, and that's going to compile and run out. And we can see now it's doing the Android build and pushing that through. Now I'll see if I've got Reflector open on my Mac. And try and share my screen and my mobile device quickly. So that should hopefully pop up on my Mac here somewhere. Let's just try again. Okay, that's not mirroring up for some reason. That's okay. Sorry, I was going to try and show you my screen, but it's running straight onto the Android device, which is kind of cool. Okay, so there's a couple of questions coming in, which I will get to. I've seen those. I just want to show you quickly something to do with the frames and how I've used them and how they've been quite helpful. The one thing I would definitely say under Tools, Get It Package Manager, there is a T-frame stand component by Andrea Magni. And that is a really useful component to use in your projects. I highly recommend using that. He's done some great books and some great blog posts and videos and bits around it. The samples with it are just perfect to go and look at, and you can find everything you need from them very quickly. But they're really usable to help you kind of start getting some advanced functionality in. So let me just go ahead and open a project that I have locally on my machine here. So let's close that one. Now this project, I'm a basketball referee, and I did an app to help me with some of the stuff that I was doing for my basketball. And the one thing I would say worked really well is having a base form. If where you can just have a base form that you use and then load everything in and out of it. Frames are great for being able to create and run in. If you look at the low-code wizard that is available, there's great examples of how to do that kind of stuff. If you want to have some specific forms, then if you've got a base form that you can inherit from, then it gives you a single place just to manage the visualization and maybe some of the other kind of functionality like in-app purchasing and other kind of bits that are quite useful to have. So on here, I've got a style book, which has got my style loaded in, which then provides the background and the kind of the styling for the application. I love the kind of the transparency type style, so I went with that for my project. The multi-view is a component that is very worth looking into. That helps you control kind of a side panel and then also a content area and having that visible and not. So here, let's just go ahead and make that visible for a moment. And here we can see a number of elements already built on here. Each one of these is a frame. So having that base functionality allowing me to control image and label as kind of a menu item within there. Very useful and a great way to kind of reuse those across different forms within the project. The one thing that I would say, one tip if you're doing database work and you want to have your database working within your project, I've got a data module. Not that one, but I've got another data module somewhere. Here, my InSpace DM, which has got my database, my physical driver, and my weight cursor on it. And I use this in most of my projects. I've got a quick check to cache the tables as the app starts up. Methods for acquiring and releasing queries, which allows me to do data connection pooling if I ever need to do it. The name to the database file, and then just as it starts up, just connecting to the database. And that allows me to just kind of manage my database connection quite quickly. The database pooling is pretty easy. Just create an instance of the component, send it back, set it to the database to be connected to, and off we go. The benefits of having a module like this is that you can then create that data module at the point the application starts. So I have on most of my applications a unit called startDB or a method called startDB. Now it's not in this form because it's in this one here. Now the reason I don't have the data module create immediately is because I'd rather get a UI up and show the error message so we can understand what's happened rather than just have the application crash directly. It's much better user experience. So if you just got the start DB in there and just call it at any time you need to before you connect to a database, then or at your entry points into the application, then that's a great way of being able to just kind of make sure everything's loading up and off you get ready to go. We also have a number of other bits in here, but let's have a quick look. This was taken from one of the templates. There's some great templates if you go in to get it. Some samples that you can use that give you some nice layouts using kind of things like here. This is the grid pane layout. So I definitely haven't explored the different layouts. The flow layout allowing you to put controls in and have them wrap around automatically. These are all really, really useful. So playing around with the UI is quite a useful thing to do. When it comes to displaying data into the application, then let's have a look. I've got an example of some of the frames that I've used here, where you might want to do things that are slightly different to using the list view, which has got some great flexibility around it already. But you can use things like here. Here's a basic one that have got a label and some text with it, but also then having ones that interject that have specific actions on them. So to call somebody or email somebody, if it's an email field or a phone number, having that functionality to be able to click on it to automatically launch the phone dialer and so on. You can create frames to then interact around that kind of UI experience, and then you can statically go and put those onto a UI element. So I think it might be under here, or maybe not. So here, as I've built my UI up, which is rather static, using the different frames, I can then have the different functionality built in, and depending if the email address is there or not there, the different stuff is then available. Okay. Now, I did mention about database, and I'm just kind of conscious of time here. The one last thing I wanted to show is just the project deployment options, which are really, really important, especially as you're getting ready to provision for the App Store. So under the project options, under the project deployment, here we can see that we can define by platform specific files that we want to deploy out. Now you can enable feature files. So if you're using database and you might want to use Interface2Go, then you can just enable that. All the files that you need for Interface2Go will then be deployed with your application straight off. Nothing else that you need to do. Bundle it in and you're ready to go. And the only thing you need to do is make sure your license is in place. Again, have a look at the videos around that. The things that you can do though is just take a note that there's slightly different pathings, remote paths between different platforms and where files are going to be put. But if you've got things that I've got like a whistle and an air horn that I get uploaded into the applications, again you can just set the paths and where they're going to push to. And then you're ready to kind of call those directly from the application. You can just get your home directory path from the APIs and it will push you directly to that remote path for the platform. But again, really, really easy to add additional resources, images, sounds, everything, and bundle it in. When it comes to provisioning, well, actually, we'll jump back to the slides because I've got a slide on the provisioning element in here. And we'll get to that in just a second. I mentioned about FireUI, definitely worth having a look at. That's a great way to be able to see, as you're changing it in the UI, actually seeing it on a device and touch and feel and play with it on the device at the same time as well, with having to run your application. So that's a really kind of cool thing. The mobile data, again, GDPR is a massive thing now. 4% of your global turnover as a company can be impacted based on having a data security issue. Interface2Go is included. It's great because it enables you to have always on data. It enables you to encrypt the data at rest, use multiple encryption keys, so you can keep to the best standards around kind of PCI compliance. If you've got, for example, credit card data being stored, which data, that should be stored as a different encryption level or different encryption key to maybe other identifiable data. Having user and role level security embedded into the encryption and decryption elements as well means that all the way through your development lifecycle, even developers can't actually view the data they shouldn't be able to view. So, for example, only the HR team can view the salary information, whereas anybody can test and work with the application across the development lifecycle. And then change tracking is obviously something you want to do if you're making changes to data that's cached on a mobile device, ready to push it back later on. And Interbase2Go has its award-winning change view technology called change views. And that is fantastic at being able to subscribe to the database and just track any changes at a field level and then pick them up and push them back to a remote server later. And that can be just added right at the end of the project. So you're not having to worry about adding additional fields or anything else into your database structures. You can just build your database, put it in there, add your subscription and subscribe to the data to then be able to pick up the changes, and it manages it all for you without any logs or anything else like that. So really, really powerful. Now, I mentioned provisioning, and we'll get into the deployment part in a moment. Basically, if you've got an Android device, it's always the same. Go to your phone settings, go to About Phone, Software Information, Build Number, keep tapping it, and it will suddenly say, hey, you're 5 steps from being an Android developer. And then you tap it again, it'll go, you're 4 steps, 3 steps, 2 steps, 1. Once you've tapped it a number of times, it'll say, developer mode's now been turned on. If you go into the developer mode options that appear, you can then turn USB debugging on. Once you've got USB debugging enabled, you can then plug your phone in and you'll get asked on your phone to allow USB debugging. It'll give you an RSA fingerprint from the computer that you're connecting to. So if you say always allow that and hit OK, it will then be up and you'll be ready to go. Now, the app stores, I said we had a bit on that here. Basically, there's provisioning required to ensure that when you submit your apps from your machine up to the App Store, that they are from you. So using the provisioning element within the project options under the compiling section, you can then set up, firstly, that you include ARM and ARM64 into the same build, which allows you to target 32 and 64-bit and then have the correct build pulled down onto the device that's calling it from the app stores. It will just pull down the one that it needs. But then there's also the provisioning. And the provisioning, basically, you create like a key file, make sure you back it up, keep notes of the details that you put into it, and put that in your version control because you don't want to lose that. Because you need that then to code sign your application so it knows that every time afterwards that this is from you. And you'll need part of those details to give the decrypt to the App Store for it to take the files that you submit in to securely then enable them under your account. Now, the Android store, I believe it used to be, and it still is, just kind of one-off payment to sign up. And then with the iOS one, it's an annual subscription. It's a lot more expensive to develop and deploy out for iOS. It's about $100 a year or so. But that then allows you and your team to provision and connect your devices through. The one thing I would say, iOS devices are really nice to kind of build and work through. But having either an iOS or an Android device to plug in and work with rather than the simulators is always really, really great. Obviously, the new iOS simulator is fantastic, so I definitely use that as well. But if you haven't got a modern Mac, you've just got an old Intel one, then they're still great to use. You can still do everything you need to do on them, but just having a physical device to plug into is all you need, really. Okay, so we've kind of sped through quite a lot here. As I say, there's a couple of handouts there to help you get going, to take you into more details in terms of provisioning your devices, pointing you in the direction of live bindings and how to use them, talking a bit more in depth about RAD server and the architecture and how you can use that. And definitely have a look at my blog as well, delphiaball.co.uk. There's a load of stuff on there, RAD server, setting you up and getting you going, and also getting you building mobile. But just the key things, again, think about data security. Interbase to Go is a phenomenal option. There's no runtime cost to it. It's got some amazing capabilities in it. So regardless what you're using on your backend data, having that as your mobile database is a number one thing that I would recommend doing. Think about your time to market, get stuff out there. The first submission into your app stores will take a couple of weeks. Yeah, the first submission will take a bit of time. It can be 3 or 4 days. It can be up to a couple of weeks, depending on the backlog and the time of year and stuff. But once you've been through that, you'll start kind of getting points to show that you know what you're doing with it and the project's okay. The following updates tend to get to the point they're just automated. So there'll be some basic checks that are automated and that'll just push it straight through. So you're talking like an hour or two. So much better way. In terms of testing and testing elements up on there, you can use TestFlight through iOS. The Android marketplace as well has the ability to upload a beta and alpha and beta testing teams, so you can then make those apps available to them in early access. So there's some great stuff in the app stores worth exploring and having a look at. User experience and scalability, again, using native, you get the best of everything you can do with Delphi. The styles are great. The ability to mix in native and non-native controls, again, just a property on the controls to say if you want the style or the native control, is phenomenal. And all of this wraps up to a very low technical debt and cost of ownership because you're using a single code base. It's all compiled. It's always giving great experience because it's to market at the same time all the time. So you haven't got some users happy because they got the updates and some upset. It's just there and ready to go. Okay, so time for me to kind of delve a little bit more into the questions. I can see quite a few of them coming through, so please keep those shooting through. Okay, Dave's saying that one of the links on the website for the blog for the download for the RAD server document is broken. We'll get that looked at. Thank you. We'll double check. I didn't mean to shout, I just had caps lock on. We're speaking about the first definition. Yeah, Richard's saying he's had mixed success with frames. Yeah, I think in VCL applications, I say there's always uses for them. I've been finding that I've been using them more and more and more through mobile development. And part of that has been just being able to break down and break away from having all the business logic inside the forms, and being able to move my data into kind of a control area, and then having the frame do a little bit of user interface work. It's a lot easier to manage and test and to break down and to just kind of get ready to work across different platforms. So I definitely say frames are something, if you're going mobile, are really, really useful, and 100% go and have a look at the T-frame stand and the demos there. Some of those will blow your mind in terms of what they're doing and how give you a much opener view about how you can put stuff together for mobile, and that's very mobile centric in terms of or tablet centric in terms of the UI and the experience. So there's a question here about formatting data to show in the grids using live bindings. Yeah, using live bindings, there's a display format that you can put onto the binding itself. There's also, if it's coming from a data grid, then you can actually use the data set to set the format for showing. So there's a couple of different approaches there. So yeah, they're really great ways to kind of manage and work with the grids. I say grids are okay on mobile. I tend to use kind of list views and a master detail kind of view a bit more, because just of the screen real estate and what you're looking at. So if you have a look at the master detail sample, that's a really nice breakdown of like a list of data. The live binding, so the list view is certainly a control that's worth spending a couple of hours having a play with, playing around with the way that you can set up different control elements on there. So you can have different lines and space them around and so on, multiple data points. They're really, really useful for building up. The other trick that I often use with a larger set of data, again, is to create a frame. Just create a small frame, and then just load in to the frame a record for each row, and just bind the data directly to that record. It's really, really quick and easy to do. and you can do that with a cloned data set as well. So you just got it cloned to a single record with a prototype bind source, and have your master record cloned to it. So it's just a pointer for that record. And then if you make any changes, it automatically updates. That's a really nice way to be able to use frames in a scrollable list as well, to make some really different types of looking UI elements as well. Okay, in terms of the device views, there's a question here about the device views. If we go back here, let's go to form here. What's going on here? Am I on the right project? I am. Okay, I've never seen that come up like that before. You should be able to, where is it? Ah, I lost it. There is a list somewhere, and I can't see where it is from. I thought it was just on one of the menu options. Ah, here we are. When you tick here you can see all the different previews that you can select in. So you can go ahead and choose kind of multiple different devices. The key thing here really is that you're getting a variety of screen dimensions and sizes. If you want to can start managing them very, very specifically, then you can come in here and start creating different views for different form factors. I try to keep clear from this where I can. Things like the multi-view will automatically, you can set it up so if you turn a tablet landscape, it'll automatically appear out rather than just leaving a much wider screen. So you can then have the menu visible, and those kind of things work really, really nicely. That's something that's really worth having a play with, the multi-view. That's one of the nice things when you rotate the devices, it automatically has the menu pop open and stay open then, so you can see those immediately. So that kind of stuff is definitely worth having a play with. Question here about connecting Android devices into Android devices via Hyper-V. I'm not sure about using a Hyper-V. I use VMware. The main thing is that I'm able to just get it to be detected by Windows. If I can, then I can get the ADB running, and it's pretty smooth nowadays. The Android updates over the last few years and the updates to Windows 10 and Windows 11, it's a lot better at loading up and identifying the Android devices and making them ready to use. Definitely just need to be able to get it to be connected to I'd probably try, if you're having problems getting it detected by Android. If you have a look at my blog, I did a blog post a number of years ago about just checking using ADB to find, using ADB space devices, I think it was, at the command line to see if the device was actually showing. As soon as you can get it showing in there, then it will show up. The other thing that it might be is a problem with the driver for your device that you have for Windows. You might need to go to the vendor's website and download the driver for it. For example, some of the old Samsung phones used to have to go to the Samsung website, get the Android ADB driver for it, install that, then it would show up in Windows and you could do the ADB testing with it, and off you went. So that might be the thing. If it's not showing up, it might just be the driver. In terms of apps to learn from, there's a number of samples in the samples directory, so please go and have a look at those. There's a number of examples up on GitHub. The one thing I would say is from the best project that you can learn from in terms of getting up and going is the low code wizard for mobile development that you can download through Get It. So if you go there, I haven't shown that in this webinar today, but that is a fantastic way to get up and running, get a load of the code done for you. You're just ready to go, build a couple of frames, get it to create the frame and pull it in, just show it. It pulls up like a page. It works an absolute dream. So that is definitely something I'd say is worth having a look at too. I believe the session is being recorded, Rick, so it should be available afterwards. If not, I've got a version I tried to record earlier that I'll get posted and available to everybody. Siva, so I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your name there, asked if you can deploy the apps only for staff in the company without having put it to app stores. Certainly you can. Both, well, it's quite easy with Android. You can just publish the APK on your network, and then people can download it and load it into their phones. They just need to say they trust loading it in from where they're downloading it. The other option is to have a private app store that people can connect to. Certainly for iOS, there's an enterprise app store option, so you can then make sure apps are available to download through the enterprise app store. So yeah, multiple options there, but there's great documentation for those both on the Apple and the Android websites. Astrid is asking, if you developed everything in VCL, do you have to rewrite everything for mobile? The answer is you need to have a mobile UI created. You're going to need to use FireMonkey to create your mobile UI. But the business logic that you've written behind it, as long as it's not calling Windows-specific APIs, you can just share that code between your projects. So, if you've got an object that was maybe a calculator, you've done all your business logic for your calculator inside an object, you can share that object directly between a VCL and a FireMonkey application, and then you can just connect to and work with that. The VCL and FireMonkey are just basically views that allow you to connect to the business logic that you've written underneath it. If you're using kind of native drivers for anything, then obviously you're going to need to have a view about how you do that. If you're doing direct data access, again, you can with Interbase, and we've seen that in certainly kind of warehouses where you've got forklift trucks driving around, and they're on a relatively small Wi-Fi network. They just connect up directly to the database, and that works well. You can use Interbase to go as a client driver to connect to an Interbase database behind, but equally, you can use REST to be able to have that data pushing in and out of those devices if they're on the local network, if they're remote, wherever they are. And REST is certainly the way you want to do it if you're going outside the network. Okay, I see there's a couple of specific technical questions where they're getting stuck. I'd say, guys, if you've got very specific technical questions, then have a look at creating a support ticket if you've got active maintenance, support and update maintenance. They might be able to point you in the right direction, which is definitely the way to go. In terms of the iOS simulator that you can use, ZSalt has asked it. Basically, you need to have some of the new Apple silicon, so the M1, M1 Pro, or the M2, and then just the iOS simulator that comes with Xcode. We use PA Server to be able to run on the Mac, and that then allows you to run and test directly across to your iOS device, which is really, really useful. Okay, a few thank yous. It's always nice to see. Thank you for those, guys. Is there a component that can read barcodes? Yes, there are components out there that can read barcodes. It depends on the platform. Some of them are being built into the camera components and so on now. One of the things that you can use if you're using or wanting to connect to different services, shall we say, on Android. So, for example, my basketball app, I've got PDFs that I download and I then want to show them. I don't have a PDF viewer, and I could just put them into a web browser and just navigate to that page, but that kind of doesn't give great functionality. So Android has a thing called intents. Now, intents allow you to provide the it's almost like saying, hey, my app can do this. My app can show PDFs. My app can capture an image from the camera. My app can show JSON data in a formatted version. My app can show a specific log file that we produce from our system. So any application can then query the other applications to say, hey, do you support this? And if they do, then they can go ahead and show it. So on Android, you would ask the platform for to be able to give you access to an intent that can read a barcode and provide you the details back. So that's the way you do it on Android. On iOS, you capture it from the camera in another way. Again, I've not done it on iOS. I've seen it's included in webinars 4 or 5 years ago, or even maybe a bit longer, people showing how to capture the barcodes through. You used to have to download specific applications and then ask for that application to be accessed. I think some of the updates have improved, especially around the cameras and QR codes and that kind of stuff. So certainly it's very doable. If the device can do it, because you can connect right down to the native layer, you're going to be able to do it. It's just a case of working out how to do it, having a look at some of the examples from around the community, not just from Delphi, but also from iOS and Android communities, and finding out and being a little bit aware about the platforms, and then being able to just call those APIs to access in and do it if we don't have it wrapped up. But quite often, I'd say have a look at the third-party component vendors as well. There's some great component vendors out there who are already providing access to a number of these kind of key things that people are looking to do very easily. There's a question about a D3JS visualization. I'm afraid I've not come across that before, Sam. So if you want to drop me an email over, I'm more than happy to kind of have a chat with the other guys internally, or have a look at that after the webinar, but it's not something I've come across. So there's a question about using web browsers with the application. So you haven't put your name in there, you just put first to last as your name. Basically, if you want to use a web browser, then there is a web browser component. You just drag and drop and put it in, and off you go. And that uses the browser that isn't native for the platform. So you'll get the Safari browser predominantly on iOS. You'll get depending on which platform you're running on, you quite often get the Edge type browser as well now on Windows or on other platforms. So yeah, it's a pretty quick way to go. Okay, there's a question here about having an 8-inch tablet and wondering how to make it scale and look nice at runtime. The great thing about FireMonkey is it's all scalable. There's a couple of different options, Tamas. You can use a scaled layout to make sure that everything scales up accordingly. Or what you can do is you can just be smart about it. You can use things like the flow layout. So you could have maybe controls that are a certain size. So if they're on a 4-inch screen, you kind of see one at a time. If you're on an 8-inch screen, you might see 2 or 3 flowing across the screen at a time. And again, putting stuff into frames, putting them into a flow layout, having things consistent, or using, you can use just a T layout instead of, I know on VCL people used to use a panel to put a lot of controls inside of. On FireMonkey, you use a T layout to do the same job. But that's that's a great way of being able to put stuff together. You can also use kind of even just a T rectangle. The one thing about FireMonkey is everything can be parented inside everything else. So it gives you some great options to be able to size things up and then have consistent size of things, and then just let the different layouts that we've got apply them up to different grid formats or layouts. Also, you can capture, using the device information, the width of the screen. So you could potentially say, right, using a grid layout, give me 2 wide or 4 wide or 6 wide, depending on the width of the screen. So these are all things that you can do to help dynamically change the way your UI works based on the size of the device that you're running off. And using the platform services to get that information. Again, have a look at the samples and platform services. They're great to be able to do that kind of stuff. There's a couple of questions for some of the blog informations. I'll go ahead and put those quickly into the chat, and then I'm just going to have to wrap up in a moment. Let's see, we're already 20 minutes over. So there's my blog in the chat. I say the links. There's a huge number of really useful links in the handouts. If you haven't downloaded those, please download those now. Yeah, so yeah, they're really, really useful places to go. And also kind of just keep an eye on the Embarcadero YouTube account. The other place that I know is in the handouts and is somewhere that I'd highly recommend going to is just DocWiki. There's some tutorials and bits to get you through on DocWiki. There's also on learndelphi.org. Well, sounding very American. learndelphi.org and the Embarcadero Academy. There's a number of sessions and courses that are up there. I say the Getting Started with Mobile has got a lot of video resources and bits linked into there. So download that, use that. That's a great way to get you started and get you moving forward. Okay, I think I'm pretty much at the end of the questions. So I'm going to wrap up here. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to download those handouts and get going. I said we've had hundreds of people on today from all around the world. So thank you for all the hellos and the comments and everything at the end there. Great to have you all on with us. We'll be doing some more sessions, kind of diving into other stuff later on. If there's specific sessions that you'd love to have or specific areas, please feel free, just drop me an email over. We've got a global team. We can get these delivered in English and Spanish and Portuguese and German. So yeah, if there's specifically things that you'd love to learn a bit more about, or there's areas that you'd love to kind of dive into a bit more, then please do drop me an email around and say, hey, Stephen, this is something we'd love to hear and see a bit more about. There might be stuff out there already. We can point you to that. But if not, then obviously, we can always put those into our idea list and help you forward. So hopefully, today you'll be able to take away from yourself that to get to mobile, everything you need is in the box with RAD Studio, with the Enterprise Edition, with the RAD server, with the Interbase to Go licenses. You've got the chance to get mobile, to get secure, to provide offline data storage, and to provide offline functionalities that provide a really rich user experience. Everything in a native, secure, compiled application, all built through a single code base using your existing code where you can, and a great chance to get moving forward to mobile. So I look forward to hearing what you kind of do, and we love hearing kind of the things that you're developing and how you're taking stuff forward. So do kind of share any information through us with that. But until next time, happy coding, everyone. Take care and chat to you soon. Goodbye now.